One of the hardest things about running is being consistent and staying committed to a routine, especially during the pandemic. I know personally it's been a challenge to start running again and keep running, particularly when I'm by myself. When I'm with other runners, it's no problem, but when it's me trying to motivate, it's a different story. So if you need a little push and encouragement to get back out there, check out the Nike Run Club app. Their guided runs and training plans can help you stay accountable to your running. One of my personal favorite parts of the app is the ability to challenge a running buddy for a little friendly competition, and it's made my own personal training a lot more fun when I'm solo. So whether you want to start or keep running, the Nike Run Club app has so many incredible resources to help you reach a new goal. There's never been a bad time to start and commit to something new. This week's guest is Lenny Wade, a PhD sports psychology and performance consultant. She's also a certified mental performance consultant. Lenny, prior to this career, was a professional athlete in the 3,000-meter steeplechase for Great Britain and Scotland from 2009 to 2018. She also competed in the 2016 Olympic Games for Great Britain in the 3,000-meter steeplechase. Lenny and I talk about topics ranging from mental health, how to know when to see a sports psychologist, and how to reframe the position that you're in if you're struggling mentally as an athlete. I greatly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you guys can take something away that will potentially improve your performance, or you can share with a friend. Enjoy. Welcome back to More Than Running with Dana. This week's guest is Lenny Wade, and we connected in a very funny way at the Olympic trials where I was freaking out watching my roommate, Heather McLean, make the team, and you were with a couple of other friends right behind me and took some incredible pictures and totally watched my complete freak out and meltdown. So a funny way to meet, but welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I was just telling my husband how I was going on this podcast and explaining to him how we knew each other. And he was like, oh yeah, I remember that. She was so excited. That was such a fun moment at the trials.
Yeah, and especially at the trials where there weren't a lot of activity going on, I feel like you could really see the little pockets of joy that were happening versus in the bigger stadium. If it was full, it would have felt pretty empty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, for our guests, I would love for you to do a quick introduction of who you are.
Okay, I'm Lenny Wade. I have my PhD in psychology. I work primarily as a sports psychology consultant and performance specialist. I also was a professional athlete for about 10 years, competed in the 2016 Olympic Games for Great Britain in the steeplechase. I currently live in Houston, Texas. I direct a master's program in applied sport and performance psychology. I do some private consultations with athletes, a lot of USA track and field athletes, but also other sports, taekwondo athletes, figure skaters, football players, basketball players. And then I also even do some little consulting work for the Air Force. So definitely have my hands full, very busy in the performance psychology world.
Was there a point when you were running professionally that you knew that you wanted to pursue this path? Did you use a psychologist yourself as an athlete competing at a very high level? Or did this kind of come as, a lot of athletes right now actually are kind of transitioning to the next stage of their career. So was this something that was always within your heart and mind, being a psychologist, or did it kind of come in an uncircuitous route, I guess?
I would say it's sort of a combination of both. So I knew as an undergrad, I was really interested in psychology. I actually started off as an economics major, did a summer internship at Merrill Lynch, and was like, wow, people literally sit behind a desk for like 50 or 60 hours a week looking at spreadsheets, and like they don't move their bodies and they don't go outside. And I had this moment where I was like, I can't do this like as a career path. And so I remember going back to my university. I was at Rice University and talking with one of my mentors, and she was like, you don't have to do that. Like, there are many other career fields where you can be very active and you can talk to people and you can still be successful. And she had her PhD in industrial organizational psychology. And she really encouraged me to pursue that as a route. And so I used her as my mentor. She also, her name's Dr. Mickey Heeple. She's also run a marathon in every state and now on every continent.
Whoa.
So we connected in terms of running, and she was just like a great role model for me. She was unbelievably successful. I really admired her career path. And So I actually got into doing my PhD in industrial organizational, or they call it IO psychology, which is more of like psychology of the workplace. So how do you motivate employees? How do you decide who to hire on your team? How do you compose groups? But it's a lot of the same like performance principles that you use in the field of sports psychology. And while I was doing my PhD, I was still training professionally. And throughout that time, people always were like, you should do sports psychology. Like, you just have like this great theoretical background in IO and you have this understanding of being an athlete. And I resisted at first because being an athlete, I know that journey is really challenging. Oftentimes, like, athletes can be like very, so narrowly focused on what they're trying to achieve that like one bad performance can be so awful. And I knew it was just like going to be such an emotional journey helping professional athletes. And I was still too embedded in the athlete world myself to see that as a career path. But as I became more mature in my athletic career, and I also just like had some interactions with sports psychologists, good ones, not so good ones that were game changers for me. I just really felt like, you know what, taking my academic background, my athletic experiences, and actually being able to help this population of people would be really rewarding.
So I'm a fellow psychology major, not quite organizational psychology, even though I did take the psychology of leadership. But you mentioned you had experiences with good and bad sports psychs within your athletic career. What are kind of the strategies? I think a lot of people are like, you should get a sports psychologist, and then don't really know what that means or where to start. So are they just for elite athletes? Like, I know that's not true, but it's like, if someone comes to you and is like, hey, I think a sports psychologist could really help you, what is kind of that first step for a person looking into getting kind of that mental help?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I still think as a professional, I'm now confident that if an athlete reaches out to me, I can help them because I know the set of questions to ask. But without that like key point of contact, it can be really overwhelming. In terms of like what makes a successful relationship is, I think it's super important for the person that you're working with to have an understanding. They don't necessarily have to have been like a professional athlete in the sport that you're doing, but actually have an understanding of what elite performance is like. Especially some of the like emotional pressures, the demands, just like kind of like the roller coaster that like wins and losses can play on your heart and make you feel so amazing and so awful. I think being able to have that context of putting so much into one singular passion and really understanding that like it does feel like life and death in some of these really intense performance situations is central for like a really good sports psychology consultant. So all of my troubled like kind of relationships were when people would be like, I mean, it's just running. It's like not that, like, you need to just like, it's not that big of a deal. And that immediately would make me be like, you don't understand.
That's a fight or flight. You're like, you don't get it. You'll never get it. And I don't want to talk to you anyways.
Exactly. So that was like, I remember just like shutting off in that person's office and being like this, like, and actually thinking that this career field is so stupid. Like, what are these people even doing? They don't know what they're doing. And then of course I was introduced to a really great sports psychologist who had just a complete understanding of, what the toll was like and having this really singular pursuit and this like such high need of achievement in this one domain, and was super helpful. So I think just doing some background in like, have they worked with like really high performers or people really interested in pursuing like a singular pursuit to the top 0.01% of the world, it's something can be beneficial. Then beyond that, just like other identifying factors. And so oftentimes you want to work with someone who seems similar to you. And that can be in terms of like their cultural background, the way that they look, their gender identity. And oftentimes people overlook some of those individual characteristics that are super important in them forming a good relationship. And that can be challenging. So I always just straight up ask people like, who do you want to like talk to in this conversation? Do you want to talk to a male? Do you want to talk to a female? Do you want that person to look like you, to be older than you, to not look like you? Just to make sure that they feel as comfortable as they can when they're having that conversation.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a professional in that aspect. When it comes to people, like as an athlete, you get a lot of people saying like, hey, do you have a PT recommendation? Do you have a therapist recommendation, sports psychologist recommendation? And I've kind of given similar kind of notes of like, you don't have to see the first person that you've seen. Like that's not the end all be all. Because it works for me, it might not work for you. So I think kind of that flexibility that you're speaking to definitely is super relatable to people, especially when, I think sometimes we only speak to the very top, like the elite, but it's like someone who's training however many miles a week for a marathon. That's like a severe life commitment too. And those everyone needs help as well. So I think sometimes it seems as if this field is almost reserved for professionals, and a lot of people could also get general help.
Oh my God. Yeah. I would say like one of my most rewarding client relationships was with a athlete. She's an older athlete, lawyer. She'd been trying for like 6 years to break 4 hours in the marathon. She'd run like 4:07 to 4:09 like 12 times.
Oh my gosh,
She
that's
was
just
like finally
painful.
just like, I was talking to my partner and they suggested that I should, maybe invest. I feel so silly for me paying money to come to your office. Like I'm not even a real athlete. And that's where I was like, so that like, this is part of the problem. You don't even, you put just as many hours into this per week as a lot of professionals do. Like you are full on training. And, when you're running slower, the runs take longer. Like she was doing a ton of work, and just getting her to truly believe that she even deserved to see me. And then just working on some simple mental strategies. And, the next race she ran like 3:54, and she was just like, that
Oh my
was the
gosh.
best
Wait,
decision of
that's
my life.
amazing.
And for me, that's, I wouldn't say it's easy work, but when someone isn't grown up in elite sport, there are like a lot of things that you can just kind of tweak their mindset a little bit that they've never thought of because they didn't grow up running high school cross country, competing in college track, having coaches kind of reinforce some of these mental skills. They basically just, decided when they were 30, they were going to start training for something that their neighbor was training for. And they don't have that kind of knowledge that a lot of us have through being in the sport for a really long time.
I want to switch gears a little bit towards kind of your work with hot, like Olympic level athletes. I think this conversation has been very prevalent this summer, especially with Simone Biles kind of withdrawing from our events at the Olympics, kind of citing, performance anxiety, obviously a lot going on with USGA on the side as well, but kind of that you've competed at the Olympics, you know what that pressure is like. And, I'm within this community and I have a lot of friends who reach the highest level and then are almost disappointed that they didn't medal. And I think it's such a fascinating phenomena that you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. A year and a half ago, you would have been stunned if you made it here. And that was your number one goal. And now that you're there, they left feeling kind of empty. And I was wondering if that's something that you personally felt at competing at the Olympics and kind of see as this narrative within elite athletes as this kind of never being satisfied element to high performance sport.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's like, it's what gets people there is that drive to constantly reach the next level of performance. So if you think back, you run in college, you want to score for the team at conference, then you want to medal at conference, and you have to make nationals, and you have to be All-American. As soon as you achieve something, you're looking for the next thing, and you're never satisfied. And that's what drives you to become an Olympian, but it's also what makes those underperformances feel like stabs in your heart, or like, the world is just against you. And so it's like you want people to have that drive, but you also want to be able to give them perspective, and also like have a little bit of like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Like a year and a half ago, if someone would have told me I was going to make the Olympics, I would have been over the moon. And now here I am disappointed that I didn't make a final or I didn't medal, where actually I've done an incredible job for what I thought I was capable of a year ago. But that's not how high performers work. And so this is where I feel like the role of a sports psychology professional is so important in helping them just reframe things, helping them recognize their achievements, helping them kind of distance what externally, family, friends, media may say about like, asking about, did you medal, or are you so upset that you didn't medal, or like, are you going to go back again to medal? And kind of learning that, of course, there are some people out there who that is a realistic goal. And that is like truly their driver for their performance. But an Olympic field is, made up of sometimes like 48 people that make the field, and probably 30 of them are happy without winning a medal. I'm even laughing because yesterday I had somebody call me about making a consultation, and they're like, "Hey, I heard you were in the Olympics. Did you medal?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "Oh, that's okay." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I know. I'm fine with it."
Oh my God, that is hilarious.
That's like the reaction, right?
You're like, also, it's been a little while. I've had some time to reflect on this experience. That was 2016. Yeah, I feel that so deeply because my goal was to make the Olympic trials, and I ended up competing at the trials quite injured. And, once I made the trials, I was like, I'm going to make the final. And then when that didn't happen, it just leaves you feeling quite empty and reframing to the next goal. I'm not sure if other athletes feel this way. It's only my personal experience, but it's like, this has been an emotional experience, especially with the Olympics being postponed a year. During this pandemic, all of us have had to put those goals that we had in 2019 kind of on pause. How have you experienced your work through the lens of the pandemic, whether that's kind of on the high performance side or kind of with athletes who have races postponed, kind of that motivational aspect of, things were very, very strange for a while?
Yeah. So overall, I think requests for consultations just increased massively. So, while work kind of lulled for some people, I think like psychologists and like performance specialists in general just really saw this increased need to help some of these populations who did feel really, really lost without the structure of competing, without the financial security of sponsorships, without guaranteed appearance fees or prize money. And, even those high school athletes who were on that recruiting kind of timeline, or who had all these races planned to hit times or marks that they needed for to get recruited. All of those troubles kind of landed on my desk, and just helping athletes like navigate through that. And a lot of times I didn't have answers because they want to know like, well, what's going to happen? Like, am I going to be okay? Am I going to run fast? Am I going to get paid? And I don't actually know. I don't know what's going to happen. Especially a while ago, I didn't know what was going to happen in COVID. And so really trying to find like small goals that they can work on, things that they can control, and focusing on like useful areas to put their energy became just like a core theme in a lot of my conversations.
Did you ever find there was a point where you had serious empathy fatigue of, you kind of are landed with all these issues on your desk? How do you kind of separate you as a person, you as Lenny, and that emotional burden from doing the work that you do, from, closing the door to the office and living your life with your family?
I am like a master reframer in these types of things. And so I'm going to back up a little bit. Like you were kind of talking about your Olympic trials experience, being injured. So kind of, I'm sure for you in some ways, it felt like the collision of like a dream and a nightmare of like, you've made it, but it's also like not under good circumstances. So when I competed at the Olympics, I ended up rupturing my plantar on the
That's
first
a fun
water
one.
jump.
I've done that too.
Yeah, I know.
Horrible.
Yeah. So it was, yeah. So, and I knew I had a tear in my plantar going in, and like kind of the 10 days prior, I didn't know, was I going to be able to put on my spikes and race or not? And then I was able to, and I worked like so hard on kind of reframing what was going on in my life and trying to put everything in perspective and try to stand on that starting line, like very proud and happy that I made it. But like, deep down, I was like devastated that I wasn't going to be able to run to my potential. And then honestly, all the work that I do now, I feel like puts so many of those horrible race, like traumatic types of running experiences that I felt like I had into perspective. And I find it almost easier to deal with because I can look back and I can be like, I remember thinking that this was like the worst thing that could ever happen to me at that time. And I'm super happy now. I'm fine. I'm actually almost thankful to have those experiences, to be able to like share and identify and help my clients heal from what they feel like are like traumatic race experiences. And so just that master reframing, like even when I'm working with clients who have all these stressors, I do the same thing with them. Like, this is going to be okay. I try to inject them with this like future perspective of the importance of like overcoming these challenges. And it's super rare that I feel drained by my clients. Honestly, I feel drained by some of my younger clients' parents more than I feel drained by the clients themselves, because I do feel like if they're coming in to see me, then they're motivated to turn things around. And just ending a session, being able to show them like a little bit of light on the horizon and being able to see that in them, I walk out of my office not feeling like, feeling like I did a good thing, not feeling very heavy.
That's incredible to hear. I think that a lot of, I've used a sports psychologist in the past, and we worked very, very closely to kind of do what you said, that reframing kind of at the situation. But when you're in it, it's so hard to have that
Mhm.
perspective. And the time is truly sometimes all you need. So it's really great to hear that the work that you're doing keeps you vitalized and energized every single day.
Yeah, yeah. Someone recently asked me like if I could have a superpower, what would it be? And like, you know, tapping my
Great
feet
question.
together and traveling anywhere would be cool. But I actually said like injecting my clients with future perspective, because like I know talking to most of the athletes that I work with, they will be okay. And like this situation will be a very rich life experience, no matter like how much trouble it's causing them right now. It is possible to make it a great narrative if they're willing to just ride out the storm. And I wish I could play them just like a clip of what their life will be like in 2 or 3 years, to just give them
Little
that
by little
motivation
ball.
along.
What kind of role does running play in your life right now? What do you run every single day? Have you picked up other activities? Competing at a very high level, at Rice, and then internationally competitively for 10 years. How did you kind of reframe what you were doing, and do you run every single day?
I run most days, so I still run like 5 or 6 days a week. I've still gone through phases where I've run as much as like 50 to 60 miles a week since I've retired, or as little as 20 or 30. It still is a core part of like my routine of feeling like a healthy, happy, functioning human. But I also am very fulfilled by like the work that I do. So honestly, there are some weeks where if I'm really busy with my work and I'm enjoying it, that I don't need to run. There are some weeks where if I'm really stressed and not enjoying it, I need to run more. And I have a lot more flexibility in terms of like, when I run, how I run, what I do, than I used to. But I'm lucky that I have still a core group of friends in Houston that are training for things like they were training for the Olympic trials, and now they're training for like the Houston Marathon, and I hop in workouts with them. And I'm just more motivated by running to help other people achieve their goals. And if that means I'm doing a 12-mile long run one day, I'll do it. Or if I'm doing a 4-mile recovery run, I'll do it. But yeah, running is still very important to me.
I've always said that I've never wanted to do a marathon. I've been quoted on that a couple times. But I will say that the only time that's been interesting for me to want to do a marathon is if I was a pacer trying to help people like break 3 hours. I think that would be so incredibly rewarding, just having that kind of group mentality. And I always, as a track athlete, was quite jealous of, the road racing scene and how happy and joyful everything is. So it's great to hear that you're still very involved within the community.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah, doing things like that. Also, a favorite of mine is helping like a high school girl break 5 in the mile. Man,
Wow.
I will like work my butt off for a few weeks to get fit enough to run 4:59 if I have to for that girl, because it's like such a moment of joy for the athlete, and it's really fun to be a part of.
Do you remember the first time you broke 5 minutes in the mile?
I mean, I do, because it was like my junior year of college. I wasn't very good until I was pretty developed. And yeah, I remember being like, "Oh my gosh, I finally did it!" And it's such a landmark of an achievement.
Yeah, I definitely can remember that too. And I wish there was that sub 4 minute mile mark for women on the pro scene, because I feel like we're kind of missing that category of that landmark kind of at the next level.
Yeah, we are.
As you think about kind of I know you mentioned you work with the Air Force, you work with so many different communities outside of running. Do you see similar attributes within all those high performing groups that are kind of, it doesn't really matter if you are high performing in the military or an athlete. They're kind of all similar attributes.
Yeah, I think there are these certain characteristics that like higher intensity, high pressure environments require out of people. So whether you're walking into an Olympic arena and you have it's that one moment you're supposed to maximize your performance and minimize any type of errors, or you are a war fighter that is in battle and you really cannot afford to make a mistake. There are certain types of, I think, personality drivers that are predictive of success, and also just the way that people handle those higher pressure, high intensity environments. But I am now going to flip and almost say like the opposite. I also think people can perform well in those environments with very different traits. So if you think about your cross country team or your track team that you've been on, and even for the listeners to do the same thing, there are probably some athletes who were so nervous before every single competition and like running back and forth to the bathroom, maybe throwing up, and they competed really, really great. And then there were some people who were unbelievably calm, patting everybody on the back, kind of organizing everybody, and they performed very, very well. Now, those two people are on very different ends of like the anxiety spectrum, but
that's the hardest as a coach for sure. I coached high school and I was like, I just don't know. I was like, you should see a psychologist because I don't know what to do with you.
Yeah. But they can channel those can both channel into great performances. So I think it's like being able to kind of translate who you are as a person into what that looks like for you to perform well, and like almost being authentic to who you are instead of trying to shift it. So if you are super nervous and you're only trying to be like the person who's super calm and cheerful, you're going to spend so much energy trying to do something that doesn't come to you naturally, that it's going to take away from your performance. But overall, I think each person has to have a capacity to handle like a higher pressure, higher intensity environment.
Interesting. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about. Like everyone has these skill sets, but they're not applied in the same way.
Yes. Yeah. And like, I think some people are super emotional, and those emotions can be positive drivers for their performance. Some people are very low on their emotional reactions, and that stability can be a positive driver in their performance. And as long as they are able to embrace who they are and find a way to channel that into their performance environment, then they're going to be successful. Where I feel like specifically high school athletes struggle is they see somebody who is successful and they want to be like that person. So then they're trying to shift the way that they're wired and do something that's not natural to them. And that actually is going to make their performance suffer way more than just embracing who they are and finding a way to have it help them in that competitive situation.
I want to speak to you kind of your work with USATF and USOPC. How did you get initially involved in those groups? Obviously competing at a high level, but for Great Britain, how did you get involved with kind of the US side of things?
Yeah, so I was actually giving a talk at a local high school in Houston, and one of the coaches there, his name's Richie Mercado, and he had been a coach for like a USA junior team, and he had roomed with the sports psychologist for that junior team, Dr. Chris Stanley. And after I gave the talk, he was like, I should introduce you to my friend Chris. He works with USA Track and Field. So he did. And at the time they were looking to add more group members to their sports psychology subcommittee. And so Chris worked with me on putting together a presentation for a conference, realized that I was, kind of passed the sanity test, reliable, and knew what I was talking about, and integrated me into that group so that I was able to do just a little bit more programming, planning with athletes. And so the first year that I was with that group, I was more kind of behind the scenes trying to figure out what athletes wanted in terms of service delivery. And then in the last year was actually doing a lot more of that service delivery in terms of meeting with athletes and helping support them on that journey to the Olympic trials and the Olympic Games. And then I coordinate specifically with the USOPC on some of their on the mental health issues. So we have our group, which is more performance focused. And so dealing with less of like the mental illness, mental health side of things, but more on optimizing performance, helping athletes in that high anxiety, high pressure, high intense environment, and how to use skills to help their performance in that environment, and then refer out to the USOPC for a lot of those mental health issues, because the USOPC just has really deep resources in their ability to help all athletes, which I feel like really kicked off. If you saw that Michael Phelps documentary, The
The
Weight of
weight of
Gold.
gold.
Yeah. So that was one of the big things that increased the investment in the mental health of athletes, really trying to elevate the priority of mental fitness to the same as physical fitness, which I think mental health had been lagging behind their priority on physical health for a long time. And constantly the USOPC and USA Track and Field are trying to narrow that gap and try to make both the priority for those high performing athletes.
I've stalked your Twitter a little bit, and one thing you mentioned was kind of about accessibility and how expensive this can be for some athletes. Every Wednesday, USOPC sent out an email to kind of whoever was on their list. I'm not exactly sure I got on, maybe because you competed at USA's or something, but kind of providing those resources. Is kind of accessibility something that you're personally passionate about within your career field?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's such a challenging issue, because the work that we do, it costs money. Like most people who do my work, like we've had a PhD, we've been working for a long time, we want to get paid, but we also want to be able to work with athletes from a wide spectrum of backgrounds, a wide spectrum of abilities, and I would love to find funding, like more funding, to reach the mental health needs of not only people who are top 10 or top 20 in the world, but also people who are competing to try and make an Olympic trials. I think that could be just a game changer in first, just elevating performances of everybody. So, and the way that I think about it is, right, people who are winning medals are motivated by the people who are making the final. The people who are making the final are motivated by people who are making like a threat to make the team. And if you can just continue to provide deeper resources, you're going to elevate the performance of everybody. So in my head, it makes like so much sense. And also the wider spectrum of people that you're able to help in terms of delivering sports psychology services, you reduce stigma, you kind of help mental health. It just has this huge trickle down effect. And so it's finding ways to either prioritize money towards that, or thinking of just more unique ways to do that service delivery for more athletes.
Yeah, I definitely find that there is a gap, especially when you graduated college and you weren't the NCAA champion multiple time, NCAA record holder, that there's not a lot of impetus to stay in the sport. There's not a lot of money. There's not a lot of resources. So it has to be very internal, but there's a certain point where you're like, is this worth it? And I really appreciate what you're working towards, because there's so much talent and potential dropping off because of the lack of support. So if there's anyone out there listening that kind of wants to spearhead this cause with us, reach out. And yeah. I definitely find that there's just so many people that would stick with this. And you kind of hear, especially on the women's side, where there's women who have, had a family and then are like, okay, now I feel financially secure, emotionally supported to kind of pursue my dream, go for that Olympic trials qualifier, things like that, versus, where were those people in the beginning of their career and what happened to them? So something that I'm also passionate about is kind of that, couple years out of school where it's hard to get kind of that development moving forward up the pipeline.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll say like some of the most uncomfortable conversations that I've had have been, a lot of coaches coach athletes across the spectrum of ability. So people trying to make the trials and people winning medals at the games. So maybe I work with an athlete who's a potential medalist and they get services for free through USA Track and Field, and they tell their teammate contacts me and I'm like, oh, actually you're not medal potential, so I'm not allowed to see you.
Interesting.
I mean, I never say that, but like that's technically the term.
You've done the work and you have gotten the advanced degree. I think that's definitely an uncomfortable situation from a financial perspective, but it's just, you don't get to see the specialist if you're not at that level, but it's just the reality of the sport.
It is, but and this is where I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. And one thing that I just from working have like typically people at the top, they're not using internal resources, but we have them for them. So why can't we just kind of like lower or allow some of these people who actually would want to use the resources and have them take advantage of it if it's something they're interested in, if we have the funds to do it. And if we run out of funds, you know what, we'll go out there and we'll create some type of like mental health sports psychology initiative, and we'll find somebody who wants to invest in that to help us.
This podcast will be twice as long if we go down that rabbit hole, so I'm going to leave that there for now. I kind of just want to end on a note speaking to, if you had any advice for someone who feels like they're struggling with their athletic performance, kind of feels like they're stuck in a rut. I know we spoke to at the beginning about, who gets the opportunity to work with someone like you. I know that we just spoke to kind of that medalist caliber, but if someone really wants to just get the edge in their performance and work with someone, what advice would you give to that person?
I would tell them to kind of explore their network. So someone within their team is going to know where to direct them. And honestly, although actually like through USA Track and Field, the way that I work with athletes are more limited group, but as like an individual who I have my own consulting business, I work with a much larger spectrum of athletes, and I've connected tons of athletes. I've been on a few podcasts and they've kind of emailed me, and I have students who are doing training, or I have people who I know in the area. And so I'm always willing to help connect people. And then also your coach or your physical therapist or one of your training partners is going to know something. So if you don't know, just reach out to some safe people, and there's no door that's the wrong door. So wherever you feel like you can ask for help, and that information will find you a person who can help you. And I think that is just, a really good first step to take if you have that question and you want to explore it, and it's not going to do any harm. And if it's the right person and you're the right fit for that psychologist, then it's going to be a real game changer in your career.
Well, thank you so much, Lenny, for coming on and sharing kind of your experience and background. I think this will be helpful for a lot of the listeners. And if it's not helpful for a listener, they'll know someone and connect it within their community. So I just wanted to share more about kind of the resources and your More Than Running journey. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Thank you so much for having me, Dana.
More Than Running with Dana is brought to you by the Citius Mag Podcast Network, and this episode was produced by Chris Chavez. I'm your host, Dana Giordano. If you liked what you heard, please give us a like and review. It truly helps so much. Thank you for listening, and thank you for running.